Poke the Bear is brought to you by Fanduel, the exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 161, presented by our good friends over at Fanduel. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. Conor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. I am doing great, Conor, and I'm excited because the season's getting a little closer. It's every day. You know that I think is it Pepsi, the football commercial that says, like, when this is over, it'll be 15 seconds closer to kickoff. And they play it before, like, every football game on, like, all the major networks. I heard it on the radio the other day. And I was like, oh, I kind of love that idea. Like, you're right. I am 15 seconds closer to kickoff. So in this podcast, you're 30 minutes closer to puck drop. There's no disputing that. There's no disputing that.
We should just keep on recording until we get whatever it is, October 11th, first game.
Yeah, maybe we'll do like a live stream on YouTube from now until the first game, just nonstop.
Yeah, that's feasible.
One of us can sleep, the other can kind of stay on and answer questions and talk about stuff. It reminds me, have you ever seen? I don't know how much you use TikTok, and this is going to sound really weird to some people. People are going to be like, "What are you looking at?" But sometimes on my For You page, there will be like random lives that come up. Your For You page, the people you don't follow really any of them. It's just stuff that pops up. So sometimes they'll put lives up that are popular. And I remember there was a trend where people would just like sleep on their live, and they would like have a sign behind them that says like, send these different types of, like TikTok emojis. Really, it's to send them money because it costs money that they get. But send it and it'll make a noise and wake me up. So there'd be people like, pretending to be asleep, and you'd send in like, or someone would send in like a certain emoji, and it'd be like, bah, 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 and they'd be like, oh man, and it's like, that's the point, So reminds me of that. Maybe we could get something going like that. A moneymaker.
It's the weirdest shit in the world. But like, I won't laugh at. I won't besmirch those people because they probably make like $8,000 a month off of just doing that. So
they're secure in the bag.
Yes, exactly. Go get the bag. Again, as we've said multiple times, we are fans. We support anyone who gets the bag, usually in the context of hockey players. But if you're got like a train whistle going off, like the green line train whistle waking you up, and someone's giving you $50 to do it, Godspeed, my friend. Godspeed.
We'll do one with the Bruins goal horn, maybe.
Yes,
and just have Kernkraft playing for
all
night and keeping us up if it sends in the dough. Anyway, speaking of money, this podcast is like all money, basically. Brandon Hagel signed a deal on Wednesday with re-signed with the Tampa Bay Lightning, 8 years, $6.5 million per. And you're probably thinking, why are we talking Lightning contracts? Well, it's an interesting comparable for Jake DeBrusk, who's a UFA after this upcoming season. Hagel, for comparison, 24 years old, came from Chicago, full season last year with the Lightning, put up 30 goals, 64 points in 81 games. So good production out of him. It's really only been 1 year, though. Feels like this is sort of like a Tage Thompson deal, where it's like guy has one good year and you say, I think he's got a lot more in him. Let's do the Atlanta Braves method of lock these guys up early at a deal that looks kind of expensive now, but cheaper down the road. Do you think this could be comparable for Jake DeBrusk?
Yeah, I think if you're looking at especially the money, that's probably more what you're looking at. I remember I saw someone had like a projection of DeBrusk's contract next year, and it said like 6.4, between 6.4 6.7. People are like, there's no way he's worth as much as Brad Marchand. I'm like, well, first of all, that contract was signed years ago. The market's kind of changed a little bit. And also, like, Brad Marchand signed like a bargain deal. That deal's been a bargain for like years. So I wouldn't put that.
It was a bargain when he's put pen to paper on that.
Yeah, exactly. So that wouldn't be one that I would necessarily project or compare it against in terms of Marchand's contract. But yeah, I think if you're looking at Hagel, if you're DeBrusk and you're a guy that's hovered around, 25 plus goals, is a young player that is proven to be at least a very efficient, top six player, that more or less falls in line with that. I think if you're the Bruins, you're trying to sign him long term. I think at the very least you're looking at $6 million per. And I think you just look at the way the market's going. You could make the case that if, let's say, DeBrusk has finally breaks through and has a 30-goal season, Could be more when you look at just the way the cap should be jumping up next year, which again, you have to weigh that. If you're the Bruins, you're probably the best case scenario is keeping it around 6.5, right? Unless like, again, gets hurt or something else like that. And then maybe you're able to keep him around 5, 4.5, what have you. But I think when you just are trying to be realistic with how the market's changing and guys who, I mean, how many 1-year deals have we seen sign this current offseason by players waiting for, the market to kind of jump up and more cap to be available? I think 6.5 million makes a lot of sense for a guy like DeBrusk. I mean, you could even make the case. I think a lot of people brought out comparables to DeBrusk and Hagel in terms of the offensive production. You listen to a few people who map out, their overall games. They think DeBrusk has more value because he's a little bit better defensively, which I think DeBrusk has made strides in that regard in terms of being a more capable. I wouldn't say like he's a legit proven two-way player, but he's definitely not a liability. He's not like someone you have to really be worried about in the D zone. Could do a lot of different things with his speed. He's added more in terms of his forechecking pressure. Like he has a lot of value if he's on top of his game. That when you look at just the way the market's changing, 6.5 makes a lot of sense. If you're the Bruins, just whether or not you want to divert that 6.5 million towards him when you've got all of a sudden almost 30 million in cap space next year. And then, of course, the term. I think if you want to sign a guy like that who's still in like the middle of his career, the longer the better. I think when you look at just the way the cap has been jumping up, I think that should be the priority, just locking up these guys long term. But that's kind of what you have to weigh if you're the Bruins, whether or not he's worth such a big investment. I think this year is going to kind of prove a lot in terms of whether he's a guy worth putting all that money down for.
It's interesting. The Hagel DeBrusk thing I see to a point. Hagel really just kind of had one big year last year. He's been slowly building, and it was with Chicago for a bit on some rough teams. So he's slowly kind of been building up to last season. And I think the Lightning assume that he's got more to give, or if he can give you around 64 points every year, that's worth 6.5 million per. And I think that that's accurate. If he stays around that's a good thing. DeBrusk is a little more interesting though, because it's been 6 seasons. He's 2 years older than Hagel. And do you feel like DeBrusk has hit his ceiling? What is the next? Do we think DeBrusk can get to that next level, right? Like, it feels like he's a guy who will hover, for 3 of his 6 seasons, he's basically been on the doorstep of 30 goals. Points wise, he's, so far been around, excluding the COVID season when, things were not obviously right for him. He's been around 40, 50 points. Do you feel that that's going to continue to move up? Because if you do, and if that's the ceiling, if he continues to move up and, get around 30 goals every year, get around 60 points, 6.5 million for 8 years would be outstanding. But if we feel like, he's going to be a guy who hovers around 40 points and you have this guy on your roster for 8 years and you don't know what to expect. I'm not saying that he's going to do that, but it's, he could. Like, then is that worth it?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of falls in line with what we've said, that this upcoming season is all about kind of clarity. And I think you're going to figure that out with a guy like DeBrusk. And again, when we say clarity, we're always talking about guys stepping into top 6 roles, or
we're talking about the Zed song.
Yes, exactly. That's all it is. That's we're going to just play that in the background of every podcast during the 23-24 season. But yes. I think for DeBrusk, right, it's I think there is more to give. I think you even saw it this past season in terms of just him rounding out his overall game. Like, even though he didn't break through for a 40-goal season, I think you saw him be a lot more consistent in terms of, even if what's been kind of the biggest knock against DeBrusk obviously has been kind of those peaks and valleys in terms of his scoring. But I think even though there were games that he wasn't scoring, he still was more impactful this year in terms of forechecking pressure, doing kind of the dirty work, being more involved with the net front. Skating, moving his feet, those things. And when he's on his game, even if he's not scoring goals, he can be an impact player in that regard. I mean, you look at his skill set and kind of how he plays his game. Yes, it hurts that he's not going to have a guy like Bergeron driving his line, but if he's crashing the net, hovering around, grade A ice, and his knack for getting in those grade A areas, he should be a guy that whoever you put him with can put up 25 plus goals. I think that's going to be the big thing this year is you hope he continues to take steps in terms of rounding out his overall game. Yes. But can he be a guy that can give you 25, 30 goals regardless of who he's got out there. Not to say that you put him on the fourth line, he's going to score 25 goals. But if it's Coyle or if it's Geeky or if it's Zacha and DeBrusk is shifted back to left wing, can you take those steps forward and not be a guy that's just a really good complement, but a guy that can drive play? You look at when he's on his game, he can do that, right? But we'll figure out this year, because I think if he can take those steps forward and be a guy that gives you, 30 goals. He was on pace for it last year. He was well on pace. I think he was on pace for 37 before he had the leg injury during Winter Classic. But if he can prove that, it seems like a guy worth investing in, especially when you look at this team and the lack of proven forwards you have here. Of course, they need guys down the middle, but having a guy like DeBrusk, if he's on his game, can give you 30 goals, drive play, seems like he's worth a long-term deal in that regard.
Yeah.
Football season is about to kick off, and Fanduel is giving you the chance to win all season long. Because right now, when you bet on a Super Bowl winner, you can get bonus bets every time they win in the regular season. Just pick any team to win the Super Bowl, and you'll get bonus bets for every victory. You can use your bonus bets on spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. And frankly, that's the best part about FanDuel, is that you can bet on anything. You want to bet on how many touchdowns Mac Jones is going to throw this year? Be my guest. Maybe how many wins the Bruins are going to have in 2023-24. Go for it. You can really do it all. So bet now on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and start earning bonus bets with America's #1 sportsbook. That's FanDuel.com/Boston.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, if that's what you get out of him, which is where he was headed last year, and that's sort of the direction that his career's headed in, if you can get that, I mean, that's a guy you lock up long term, because as you said, like if he can get you around 30 goals every year, and he can be reliable for that, and also be reliable to be hard on the forecheck and gain offensive zone entries and be reliable in his own end, and you suddenly have a more complete player, because obviously he's got the speed and he's not afraid to get to high danger areas. Like he's a very interesting player in that respect, that he's this very high draft pick that does not score his goals with beautiful snipes and dangling defenders. It's hard work. It's just putting your head down and getting to those dirty areas. And when you have a guy like that, you want to keep him around. Like that's a Bruin. That is a Boston Bruin. And I think the issue, as you said, it's been consistency over the years. And if he can continue to do that, 8 years, 6.5 is a very reasonable price for him. Because the other thing you have to think of is, and you kind of alluded to this, the market's changing. The salary cap should be going up next year sizably. You will have more cap space. So at $6.5 million, he's making more. He would make more than Marchand now. But as you move into that next generation, a reliable top 6 winger who can get you 30 goals will be getting $6.5, $7 million as the market changes. So, but the Hagel comparison's still a little weird to me, just because, like, I think Hagel's more of a, did it once, let's bet on him doing this and more again. DeBrusk is more, hey, if he can give us kind of the a little bit higher than he had consistently, it's we're going to give him a long-term deal. But it brings this up. What happens with DeBrusk this year? What ends up happening? Because you mentioned it. You don't have Bergeron. You don't have Krejci. Most likely going to either have Coyle or Zacha, or if your projections are correct, maybe a Geeky in between him. We could say we'll make a line of like DeBrusk, Frederick as the center, and Lucic on the right side, and people would lose their shit over it, and maybe rightfully so. But what happens with him this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to fall on just how the Bruins overall fare and how DeBrusk does, right? Because I think if you're the Bruins, I think the focus is keeping him long term. You invested in him. You didn't move him 2 years ago when he put the trade request because you thought he was a valuable asset. Wouldn't make much sense just to let him walk this upcoming year. But it's going to depend on if he can take steps forward, if he's a guy worth investing in when you all of a sudden have all this cap space available. And it's going to depend on how the team does. I think we've talked about, and you've mentioned it, Evan, that this team's giving itself plenty of options this upcoming year in terms of how they want to handle the season. Of course, they want to contend. They think they have a team that can kind of grind through, keep up, accumulating points by being a stout defensive team, but things go wrong. If a few of your key guys have injuries, you're all of a sudden hovering around 500, or you're on the outside looking at playoffs, and you get to middle of February, then maybe it's a guy like DeBrusk ends up getting moved if you're trying just to accelerate this kind of retool you have. Again, I think that's a contingency plan the Bruins don't want to do. That's kind of the break glass in case of emergency. But I think the focus is you have DeBrusk in place. You see if he can continue to drive play, be a guy that's not a very good complementary player, a guy that can be not a franchise player, but a guy you can put in the lineup, pencil in the top six, and know you're all set with that line. You have a proven 30-goal guy there that can help drive play. If he can show that, then I think the check's going to be there for him. It's just going to figure out whether the Bruins as a whole can be competitive next year, and if DeBrusk can continue to take steps forward and not be a guy that even takes a step back without having a guy like Bergeron on his line.
Yeah, you mentioned the not being a complimentary piece, being more of a. You almost want him to be. Krejci had a bigger impact, but Krejci was sort of that. You knew what you had every year. We talked about this when he retired. Like, granted, the ceiling was higher and his impact was more, but like, you want that out of DeBrusk, right? 30 goals, around 60 points, 65 maybe, like, perfect. That is a reliable piece. That is someone that you can rely on no matter what. I want to do a little hypothetical here because I've made my case for if they're not good next year, or, you got to sell off pieces. DeBrusk would be an easy one to sell and get a legitimate return for. Let's say DeBrusk has a crazy season this year, because again, it's a contract year. It happens to players, Connor. There's a little, when you get that Arizona game in mid-November, you really turn it up. You don't turn it back. You turn it up a bit and try to go for 2 or 3 goals to boost the stats a little bit. But let's say he's, it's February, DeBrusk is on pace for, let's say, 40 goals, right? Let's say he's having a really good season, but the Bruins are outside the playoff spot. They're good handful of points out. Things are looking kind of bleak, but DeBrusk is a real bright spot. And again, I'm putting you on the spot here because I'm putting myself on the spot. I don't really, I think I know what my answer would be here, but do you kind of sign him long-term and say, hey, we have a guy who can hit 40 goals and hope that you turn it around in other ways? Or do you say, hey, we're going to sell really high on this asset and potentially jumpstart a whole retool here?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I think if he's a 40-goal guy and you're the Bruins, you're desperate for homegrown talent, you can add to this core. Having a guy who's, 26, will be 27 in that upcoming season in the middle of his prime, kind of falls in line with what the Bruins are trying to do, right? This isn't a team that I think is looking at, a 5-year plan. They're still trying, they're looking at, you get another center or two, they're right back in the thick of it, right? So if DeBrusk can prove that he can take a huge step forward, probably worth the money. Now, does that mean if he gets 40 goals, he's going to be asking for 8.5, 9? Then you're like, then that's I think where the issue is, right? Is how much that bumps up his overall value, and whether or not, again, it's one thing if you think he can be a regular 30-goal guy, or a guy 25, 30 goals can drive play, warrants the $6.5 million, maybe $7 million, if you look at just the bump from next year in terms of just the way the market's moving. But if he's a 40-goal guy and you think that's just like a flash in the pan, then things are a little bit tougher, right? Because again, the one thing you have to be aware of is that unlike this year where everyone was terrified of spending money because no one had cap space, Bruins are not going to be the only team that all of a sudden has a lot of cap available next year. So that is something you have to be cognizant about, that there will be certainly a lot more bidding wars, I think, next year. So have to weigh that as well.
Yeah, I think in this, if it was that situation, that would feel kind of like a flash in the pan, just because, it'd be a big up in production. But again, it's a contract year and he's moving into his prime. So that wouldn't be, a crazy deviation from the norm. I totally get what you're saying, in that it's a 40-goal scorer. He's homegrown, he's a Bruin, that whole thing. And I get that. But I look at the rest of the roster, and in a situation like that, what else is netting you what you need? Because this team needs, I've said it, this team needs firsts or high-level prospects, or, you need to infuse the talent pool coming up down the line. And, in that situation, obviously, what is Linus Ullmark doing? Is he having a good season? Can you trade him? but I don't know what else on the roster you're dealing that has value that wouldn't hurt you. And yeah, I think in that situation, you probably would have to part with a guy like DeBrusk. I'll also make the argument you have a 50-goal scorer in Pastrnak. And I'm not saying you want more. I'm not saying you don't. But, if DeBrusk worked his value up with a 40-goal season or a 40-goal pace to, as you said, an $8 or $9 million player, would you rather take that money and give it to a center or something of that like? So I just, in that situation, I would have a tough time not selling high, just given that you would get a lot for a guy like that and who's at, who'll be at $4 million next season and can help a contender and fit under the cap and be a legit piece. I'm not saying I want them to trade him. I'm saying in that situation, I feel like you would get a first, you would get, maybe a top prospect or something like that. You would get pieces for him. And I don't hate that. Granted, I don't trust this front office to make that pick correctly. So maybe that's the second part of it. But you need future pieces in that situation. If they are a wild card team next deadline, no, don't trade him. Don't do that. But if you're on the outside looking in and you're firmly on the outside looking in, that's an easy piece, I think, that, unfortunate to part with, a fan favorite. No more Oreos. But that would be unfortunate. That would be tough.
Of course.
Speaking of fan favorites, by the way, I said, I haven't heard from Derek Forbert in a while, or Darla Forbert in a while. Have you looked at his Instagram recently? His latest post was, I think, like 8 or 9 days ago, and it was just 2 dogs, Darla being one of them, sleeping, and Darla lets off the meanest fart you ever heard, and the golden retriever, I think it was, just like stunningly like wakes up. And so it was classic Darla Forbert. So I thought that was an interesting video.
We need all the, after this offseason, we need all the dollar content that possible. So thank you, Derek, for supplying that. I'm
kind of disappointed though in Derek Forbert because I think that's the only video he's posted this offseason. There might be more and I missed them, but
I think he had the one where it was like, how hungover is everyone when they do their clear photo? It's him at the airport with like the the clear like face scanner thing you used to like cut through the line at TSA. So
yes,
which is my clear photo that I have. I'm not hungover. However, I'm like, I think going on a flight to like Charleston. So I think I have on this like really sunny tropical shirt, and I just look miserable though. But it's like it's a very contrasting photo. So that's my contribution to clear. But
there you go. That's interesting. I don't have clear. I stand in line just like every other person. I'm an everyday Joe. I stand in line and wait my turn. As bad as that is, nobody travels well though. Nobody looks good while traveling. You know what I mean?
No,
like, it's
just
not.
Get me through the airport, through the flight, and then I can change. I'll wear sweats. I'll do all that. I'm always if you dress up for the airport, you're a psychopath. So
oh yes, when I was there earlier this month, earlier this summer, there'd be people there like on flights in suits and khakis, and I'm like, what is this, like 1930? You got to wear suits to everything. You got to wear khakis. And
it's like people who went to baseball games with like a full like a straight up zoot suit on. I'm like, no, like
give me sweatpants,
peanut shells all over you. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, give me sweatpants or athletic shorts and just like a t-shirt. I was like, did I underdress for this Delta coach flight? Like, I don't know here. But yeah, I'm always fascinated with people who dress up for flights and feel that they need to look their best when they fly. I want to just I just want to relax and pretend I'm not there. Just get me from point A to point B. That's all. We're gonna turn into like a Jerry Seinfeld stand-up routine on.
Yes,
I'm eating the peanuts now. Anyways, the Brandon Hagel deal wasn't the only deal that came down on Wednesday. The big one was Auston Matthews. Finally happened. 4 years. Was it 13.5 million per or 13.25?
I believe.
Yeah. 13.25 million. 4 years is interesting though. That's an interesting one. I think my guess is, and I don't know this for a fact, obviously, but my guess is his representation kind of said, hey, let's do 4 years, see where we're at in 4 years. You make, one of the higher, a very high salary now, see where the market goes in 4 years. If you want to go somewhere else or, the market changes and suddenly you're making 16, 17 million per. So I actually think that's kind of a smart move on his end of things because it's long-term enough. Where I think this impacts the Bruins, first of all, you can pencil down Matthews, the Bruins 1C in 2028. So that's,
there you go. Yep.
Check. There you go. You got to wait a little while, unfortunately.
People can stop doing those Photoshops now for at least the next couple of years, but alas.
True.
Yes.
It's unfortunate. Thankfully, they're made, though, so we can take them and still use them when we want. The one area I think this actually impacts them is not so much Matthews, but sort of the whole take of free agency. And we've said this a lot. You're not building your team in free agency. Guys like Matthews and, most times do not get to free agency. In this case, he definitely didn't get to free agency. I was actually talking to one of my friends on Xbox like a couple days ago, and he was saying, Matthews and Lindholm will be in free agency. And I'm like, there's a good chance neither make it to free agency. And Matthews immediately went off the market. So that's my point, is that I think it's a signal to, it's going to be tough to find a number one center in free agency. How do you think this impacts the Bruins?
Yeah, I think that's kind of point A in terms of, I think probably point A is that the Maple Leafs are still going to be pretty competitive when you have a guy like Matthews there. Again, defense, goaltending, got some issues, but that team still with him, they still have surprisingly a shit ton of cap space next year that if they want to just re-sign everyone, they can, like along with Nylander, while also probably adding a player or two. So they're still going to be in the mix. As much as I think you look at other teams like the Lightning taking a step back, I think Toronto's still going to be there. But yeah, I think the reality of free agency is the thing that kind of sticks out to me, right? Because we talked about this, I think, on Bruins Beat. Like, how many times do you have a legit franchise-altering guy go to market? Like, it's Tavares. You could say maybe Gaudreau was last year, but like I always look at the top examples like Stamkos, right? Where it's like, all right, he's going to hit free agency. The Bruins be involved there, all right, and then he gets free agency, and then he immediately signs with the Lightning, right? Like, and again, it's rare even to have a player of that caliber get to free agency. Of course, he then re-signs immediately, but still, like, you never see that happen.
What year was that? Was that like 15-ish? I forget.
I think it was 16. I think was he like the only good signing during that entire?
Yes,
15 or 16.
That was yes, you're right. And the other thing is, like, I feel like in this market, in this day and age, he would be re-signed like a year before.
Oh yeah.
So I think it's even changed since then.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, that is going to be the challenge in terms of if you want to go like Elias Lindholm or anyone else, you have to be creative. Either you have to try to trade for him first. A lot has to, I think, go wrong between, like, I don't think players ideally want to hit just like the open market. Some guys just want to get the bag, I guess. But like Lindholm probably wants to get some clarity on his future. Like, I think that's kind of his focus. That's why you see a lot of times these guys get traded and they usually end up signing a contract shortly thereafter. So I think it is very rare to have a guy like a Lindholm fall on the market. So whether it's trading for him, I think we always mention, like, if the Bruins have cap flexibility, maybe you're a team that can take on a contract like Thomas Hertls in a year or two. You look at like Clayton Keller, who I do not think is going to finish out that contract in Arizona, given the state of that franchise. Like, those are things that you have to do in terms of being involved, kicking the tires, being able to accommodate a larger contract in that regard. Again, Lindholm could hit free agency, which again, then you have to outbid a whole bunch of other teams. But yeah, it's not like I think like in like baseball where it's like so many guys hit free agency and the Yankees or the Dodgers are going to throw the bag at one of those teams, one of those players, and it feels inevitable. Hockey, it's a lot tougher to like build franchise altering guys through just throwing the bag at them. It doesn't happen nearly as often as some of these other sports. So it's going to be a lot tougher for the Bruins in terms of just getting a guy to market and then the next hurdle, signing them against the 10 other teams throwing the bag at him as well.
By the way, speaking of MLB free agency, Rip Shohei. Oh my God, the torn UCL, that probably cost him like $200 million.
At least like 300. I think like $200-300 million. Yeah. Also, straight up, like, let's relegate the Angels for one, wasting this man's prime.
Yes.
And then just blowing up his elbow. I think twice, right? He had Tommy John in 2018. So relegate the Angels.
Yeah. Oh no, the Angels are a useless, worthless franchise to me. I've never understood them. They've been for most of my life, they've been like a team that should have been good that wasn't. Even when remember when they got like Pujols and like CJ Wilson and that, they had young Trout, just garbage team. Back to NHL free agency, though. The other thing, not only do players not want at the open market, but teams do not want to lose these guys. I mean, think of Johnny Gaudreau leaving the Flames, walking away, getting nothing for him. Probably has set that franchise back many years in terms of what you could have gotten for him. I mean, at least they got something for Tkachuk, and I still think they completely. I mean, I think they won the trade in terms of pieces. Tkachuk obviously had a bigger impact on the Panthers than Huberdeau and Weegar did in Calgary. But if the Flames took those two pieces and said, hey, you know what, we're going to just do a full-scale rebuild and get a lot in return for both Weegar and Huberdeau, they would be much more ahead, and you would kind of make up for the loss of a Johnny Gaudreau a little bit more, at least long-term. But just losing Gaudreau, think of also granted, I think the Islanders went to the playoffs a year or two after losing Tavares. But still, I mean, you have to be creative, and losing guys in free agency like a Matthews or even a Hurdle and not getting anything for them is a mistake. And I think that's why you see a lot of the guys, Hampus Lindholm getting dealt before just being able to walk in the open market, or Pierre-Luc Dubois even same thing. So yeah, I have little faith that the Bruins are going to be able to execute sort of a defining franchise player who's a number one center in free agency. If you can get Lindholm, great. But I just think that if the Flames don't really kind of nail him down this year and have to trade him, I think you're getting outbid. You're getting outbid most likely. You don't have the pieces to get him. And by the way, if Sweeney pulls it off, all the credit in the world. I'm not, good for them. But just at face value, I don't know how that happens unless Lindholm says, I only want to play for the Boston Bruins, and you sort of get lucky like you did with Taylor Hall and the Sabres fiasco. So that's my biggest takeaway with Matthews. And as you said, Leafs are still going to be real good. I think preseason, I haven't made my official prediction yet. Feels like they're probably going to be the number one team in the Atlantic, unless I'm missing something.
See how their goaltending is, but otherwise,
that's my thing. That's why I'm hesitant. It's they're gonna put up a ton of goals, but what does their goals against look like? I think that's the biggest thing. So, anyways, Connor, what can people look forward to from you over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe?
Yeah, we're gonna have you covered throughout these final weeks, thank God, of the off season. So we'll have you covered on stuff like lineup changes, younger players fighting for minutes, all that stuff over at Boston.com. So please read our stuff over there. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. We're presented by our good friends over at Fanduel. You Poke the Bear listeners. Have a great rest of your week.